WNST to let the Ravens people come out here. You're not making friends with these Colts people out here, and we're all awaiting the Ozzie Newsome words and the weekend and combine stuff. Garrett Downing from Ravens.com is my guest in my lounge. Nice lounge we got here, dude.
It is quite a nice lounge.
Yeah, well, you're out here saying
where are the drinks? Where are the drinks? Where's the hospitality? I'd expect there to be a lounge. You should have a nice bar set up.
We're in Indianapolis.
We'll just wait for happy hour.
Okay.
I'm just happy to have oxygen at this point and running water. I guess for you guys out here, there's so many angles to go after this thing on the inside. We were obviously all in the same airplane flying out here on Tuesday and getting ready for this thing. We're all talking wide receiver, right? We're all talking about guys on the offensive side of the ball. I'm wondering if inside the building they're hearing it and feeling it. Certainly Luke and I, we've watched the defensive sides of these drafts. We're all expecting offense, and I think that's where our eyes are. I know the staff has to look at everything, though.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they look at everything, but I think that, when you think about what's going to happen in this year's draft, I'd be, last year was 4 straight defensive players. I'll go out on a limb here. I'm really going to just say something crazy, but I do not think it will be 4 straight defensive players again this year. I think, in all honesty,
there'd be a mutiny in Baltimore.
Yeah, right.
With fans.
In all honesty, I think that in the conversations that I've had with, we did a podcast last week with Joe Ortiz,
right.
And talked through just the strengths of the draft, what his impressions are of the draft, and also what the Ravens need to do. And I definitely have the vibe and feeling that, the Ravens are going to look hard at the skill positions on offense. And maybe they end up taking an offensive tackle at number 16 based on how the board falls. But I think that whatever the position is, I definitely think it's going to be offensive heavy this year.
It's interesting. You mentioned your conversation with Joe Ortiz, and one of the quotes from that I found interesting. I've talked about this a lot, and I'm not the only person, but since Super Bowl 47, there's 17 day 1 and day 2 picks. 13 have been defense. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that Joe Ortiz said, which, look, I don't expect him to break down specifics, but he flat out acknowledged maybe they've overvalued certain positions and they've undervalued others. So I'm interested to see, and ultimately the proof is how the board falls. I mean, everyone's talking about Calvin Ridley. He might be gone 7 picks before the Ravens are even on the clock, but getting back to that 4 straight defensive players last year and going out on that limb and saying, I think they're going to see some offense. That's one of the questions I've had over the last few years. Have they just valued defense too much, and that affects how they set their board up? So it is going to be really interesting, but let's keep in mind.
Well, every year we come back and say, can the offense be better? Can the offense be better? The offense has to be better. I think we're all in agreement of that over the last 5 years. That's been part of what stuck them in the mud, right?
Yeah, for sure. And going back to your point about Joe's quote in terms of overvaluing certain positions and undervaluing, I thought it was interesting based on you think that this happens, but he talked about how they go through a process of sort of self-scouting in themselves. And so they go through and they say, okay, what worked here, what didn't work here, we got this one right, we got this one wrong, how did a guy perform 3 years down the road, and what did we have a grade on him back in 2014, what was our grade on him? And so I think that all those kinds of conversations are definitely happening behind closed doors right now. But yeah, I mean, for sure, the offense has to be better. They have to have more impact players that in the fourth quarter somebody can take over a game. I mean, there's no secret to that. I mean, I think when I look at this team, I think the biggest thing is they need to fix the passing game this year, and it needs to be good from week 1. Last year it got better as the season went along.
Well, that's hard to do. Your quarterback better be upright in August, too.
That's true. I mean, that's the challenge.
We're sitting here in Indianapolis where they lost the whole season last year with the quarterback, and they don't even know what's happening with the next year, right?
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, you go through and you listen to all these GMs and coaches talk, and there's a handful of them that their seasons were doomed or spoiled pretty early on based on injuries and quarterbacks, and they go down. So but regardless of all of that, I just think that going into this offseason and this draft, the Ravens are looking hard at what they can do to try to add impact players to the passing game through all means necessary. And I guess it gives us something to talk about that's kind of fun because it's a sexy position.
Well, and we're finally going to hear from Ozzie Newsome, which we have not heard from him in quite some time. And I'm interested to hear. I mean, so many of us had speculated, not necessarily BaltimoreRavens.com, but about the future of Jeremy Maclin, whether he's going to be on this roster in 2018. Many people assume he's not going to be because it wasn't a good fit, because you can trim some cap space. At the same time, who are you hanging your hat on as far as guys that are going to be back? Chris Moore is kind of the one guy that you say, all right, I'll bet good money that he's on the 53-man roster, assuming he's healthy. Beyond that, there are other incumbents. I don't know. I think Brashad Perriman certainly gets an opportunity going into the preseason, and you see what happens. Same with guys like Quincy Adebojo. But I want to hear Ozzie say, and he might just give you the whole, well, he's on the roster right now, which he said before when players are about to be cut but haven't yet. But what are you most curious to hear from Ozzie, since we haven't heard from him really as far as a Q&A session since going back to last year's draft?
Yeah, it was probably back during the draft last year. Yeah, I mean, I think that the offseason kind of blueprint, I'm curious to hear what he has to say about that. They don't necessarily give you everything on that.
Well, they go down to Florida and they have a plan.
Well,
it's better than a baseball team. I mean, at least I know they've talked about it, they volleyed it, and whatever decisions they're making on draft day, it's not like let's throw a dart.
Yeah, well, they have a plan. Now, whether they share the plan with us is oftentimes another conversation.
Yeah. But I don't expect them to.
Yeah, but I think that they give hints, and sometimes you go back and you look at how things play out, and then you actually go back and if you look at what Ozzie said at this time last year, and you're like, oh, okay, actually, that they, he shared some things, and you go back and they play out the way they sort of hinted at around things like the combine. Anyway, so yeah, I'm curious to get some hints on the blueprint. I'm also, obviously, this is the first time we're talking with Ozzie since it was announced after the season that Eric DeCosta will take over as general manager next season. And so, it'll be interesting to hear what Ozzie has to say about that. Obviously, him and Eric have a great relationship. They've been together for 20-some years. And so that'll be something that'll certainly be a talking point. And then I think that just the wide receiver position, and we keep circling back to it, that is going to be a talking point for Ozzie. So
it's Groundhog Day.
Yeah, I mean really. Do you go... do you have to trade up in the draft to try to get somebody? Do you have to try to make a trade this offseason? I really think that they're probably looking at every single avenue, trade, free agency, the draft.
Well, there's probably a handful of other Mike Wallace's or Jeremy Macklin's that are under a contract that may be like Eric Weddle is for us. Just a lot of money at that point, and it's a decision that needs to be made. I don't know that the Chiefs knew they were going to get rid of Macklin last February, right? I mean, I don't know that Ozzie knew he would be available at that point, or that the Ravens would have the kind of cap space they need to get that kind of player. Now, clearly, that didn't work out.
Right.
But the year you get a Bolden, it works out. The year you get a Matt Burke, it works. The year
Steve
you get
Smith.
Weddle. I mean, Steve Smith, sure.
Yeah, there's been that's one thing, and Ozzie's been pretty upfront about the track record in terms of drafting wide receivers, but he's done a really good job of finding veteran wide receivers and putting them in and getting them at a good price. Derek Mason, Anquan Bolden, Steve Smith, Mike Wallace, those are guys.
Shannon Sharp was a wide receiver. He just didn't look like one.
Yeah,
literally.
You can get these guys oftentimes that are motivated and have been released because they're making too much money or they're too old or whatever the reason is. But I still think that there's the need for a young guy too. And so that's, as much as nice as it would be to find a guy late in the process that nobody expects to hit the market, then he hits the market and you get him, that's great. But I also think that they're going to be looking for a young player to have kind of grow throughout the process as well. And they've taken shots. They took a shot with Brashad Perriman, and it hasn't worked out to this point. But they have fired that bullet, so to say. I
think it's going to be interesting this year, assuming Ridley's gone. Mm-hmm. Let's say he's gone, and he might go.
Is that obvious to you if he's there at 16? Is that obvious?
No,
I don't think anything's ever obvious. But
they passed on Howard last year. Just as an example, when we thought offense. Big tight end, franchise tight end, and they said, we'll take a corner instead.
Well, right. But at some point, not necessarily that specific decision, but at some point you do have to prioritize your offense. The proof is in the results. But my point is, I think when you look at this group of wide receivers, and Garrett, I know you're big into the draft, I'm really fascinated to see how someone like Cortland Sutton does in the 40-yard dash, because he's the kind of guy who's 6'4", probably not a first-round pick, although if he runs – I don't know if he runs a 4.5 or a 4, something like that. Maybe that's a different discussion. But getting back to that whole discussion as far as what they do, I think it has to be a multi-pronged attack this offseason. I think you have to go out there with the mindset that, all right, maybe you're not going to trade for Jarvis Landry, but you need to bring in a wide receiver that's at least intriguing. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe that means you re-sign Mike Wallace. Maybe that's kind of your, not security blanket, but at least you know what that is. And maybe it's not in the first round. Maybe you take an offensive tackle in the middle of the first round, as a lot of people have mocked. I am so intrigued to see how the wide receivers do over the next few days with testing, the interview process we won't find out.
Everybody needs them, and nobody has any of these guys in the first-round grade.
Well,
so the question is, a fourth-rounder becomes a third-rounder, a third-rounder becomes a second-rounder.
And I think, and I know Mike Mayock brought this up in his conference call earlier in the week, you look over the last 3 years. Everyone looks at the 2014 draft and how much success those wide receivers had, but that is absolutely the exception to the rule. Since 2015, and that includes Brashad Perriman in that group, Amari Cooper's really the only first-round wide receiver you can look to and say, all right, looks like a first-round talent and has produced early. That way. He had his issues last year. So, Garrett, I'm more intrigued, more so than just Ridley, because everyone's just talking about him. Yeah. And we'll continue, and we kind of do that just like they do in every city with 2 or 3 guys that you really kind of pine for. I'm really fascinated to see how the DJ Moores do as far as testing this weekend, because I think if you look over the last few years, that's where some of that value has really been, that second and third round. And Juju Smith-Schuster comes to mind immediately.
Yeah, Juju Smith-Schuster last year, Cooper Kupp last year.
Sure.
Are 2 guys, second and third round picks that turned out to be probably the best 2 receivers, at least so far in that draft. And I tend to think that Ridley will be gone, because I just go back to last year and you had 3 guys, and none of those guys, Corey Davis, Mike Williams, and John Ross, nobody viewed those guys as an A.J. Green, Julio Jones type player, and they were all gone by 9.
There was a lot of question about Ross, too. I mean, more than the other 2.
Yeah, I mean, Ross for sure, he was a small guy with injury problems that jumped on the scene really here. This is where he had his big coming out party with the fastest combine 40 time ever. But all 3 of those guys had questions, and they were all gone by 9. So that makes me say that, to your point, Nestor, wide receivers is a position that teams around the league value. So all of a sudden, a guy who you think might be a mid-first round pick, now he's gone at 7 because people value wide receivers, and that makes it challenging. I mean, I think when you look back at last year, there's certainly times, like I would have been curious if Cooper Kupp were still on the board for the Ravens in the 3rd round. I believe he got picked right before the Ravens had a chance. I don't know what they would have done. I'm just saying, like, it sometimes because the league values that position, it can be hard to find them. Now, I think the 2nd round, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Ravens drafted a guy in the 2nd and 3rd round.
Like
they did with tight end when they took Ed Dixon and Dennis Pitta, and you get both of them. That could certainly be the play this year.
I mean, at some point you have to invest in that position. I mean, to the point that you made a little bit earlier, they have done a nice job with finding players either past their prime or on the tail end of their prime, like Anquan Bolden when he was coming over from Arizona. But other than Brashad Perriman, they haven't really invested a ton of early picks in wide receivers. I'm not saying you need to take 2 on the first 2 days every year, but think about some of the guys that we've talked about in recent years who haven't panned out, like Aaron Millette and Tommy Street. I mean, these are day 3 picks. These are 6th and 7th round picks. You can't really expect a whole lot there. And that's just being realistic. I mean, yeah, you'd love to find Antonio Brown, but
so would every team that's here at the Combine.
Exactly.
But you also invested a 1 in a kid that really never got on the field much other than 16 for 5 minutes. I mean, that's a very, very difficult. We always say, well, they didn't invest in this. They have. They drafted Max Williams.
They haven't invested nearly enough at wide receiver. You can't tell me a first-round pick every 10 years is investing enough in a wide receiver. I'm talking more so the first 4 rounds of the draft. And if you go back and look over the last 6 years, since Torrey Smith, since that year, and they took Tandon Doss on day 2. I think he was he was fourth round pick. But since then, the one guy they had taken in day 1 and day 2 was Brashad Perriman over a 6-year period. That's where you kind of get what you pay for in that regard.
To some degree, you almost want Steve Smith. You almost want Jeremy Maclin over
Why does it
have to be Navar Darling or the next?
But why does it have to be an either or,
though?
Can't it be both? Can't it be both? Sometimes?
Don't you love sitting between the 2 of us, Garrett?
I
By
know.
the way, Garrett
I'm bullish on wide receiver.
Garrett Downing joining us here. It's all brought to you by our friends at Howard Bank. A relentless commitment to be the best at everything they do. Branches throughout Baltimore and Maryland. The unique hands-on approach to banking. Also, Royal Farms. I got my Royal Farms coffee mug. They don't serve Royal Farms coffee. Oh, there we go. Here in Indianapolis, but if they did, I would fill it up with Kona Blend. Get the app, download the app, use it, get some free chicken. You like Western fries? They don't have Western fries where you're from, do they?
No,
Ohio.
There's no Western fries in Ohio, but I like Royal Farms food.
Real fresh, real fast.
Yeah.
Last but not least, Maryland Jockey Club. The entry's now on the front page of our website at WNST.net, as well as our morning newspaper, and that's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Garrett Downing from Ravens.com, The Lounge. the man with the microphone flag. I hijacked your podcast earlier today. I guess for the rest of the league, this has been an impressive thing for me. And we had Chris Ballard from the Colts sitting 3 feet away earlier, and Sean McDermott was sitting back here a little while ago with Buffalo. I'm fascinated on a day like this where you see leaders and coaches, how incredibly transparent the league, the people can be, and how honest they can be at the podium here. Not saying about John or Ozzy or whatever, but there are definitely organizations here that get after the media. You know, I mean, they're recruit. John Gruden was, y'all come out and drink with me tonight. I mean, there's a little bit of that going on as well. It is fascinating. The 32 teams all drive 32 buses 32 different ways, have 32 different things that they value in the draft, and yet we sit here today, they're all in one place. It gives you an evaluation. And I said to Luke, it's like the first day of school. Everyone here has holes, including the Eagles on their page. Everyone has needs, everyone has wants, but they all also have this strategy that they want to employ over the next 48 weeks or whatever to get to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Combine always is interesting to me because you have these guys from this is the hub of the NFL universe this week. Sure. Everybody is here. And so everyone's got kind of different philosophies on how they want to attack this thing. And I get all that, but it's just an interesting place to see all of these coaches and scouts in one place trying to accomplish the same thing. And they go about, I guess, in different nuanced ways in terms of how they scout, where they sit in the seating bowl, whether they talk during the workouts, whether they don't, whether they go, whether they hang out with the media.
Coach. Harbaugh was one of the guys that hung out with Belichick.
Yeah,
kind of famously, and that became part of the relationship. That Steve got a call from Bill Belichick saying hire John.
Well, I also think you can see the kind of progression of coaches and the rise of coaches over time. And you've been obviously covering this, Nestor, longer than I have been, but you just see some of these coaches, like Adam Gase. He gave his press conference today, and I think he's going into his third season with Miami, but he's somebody, you go back 7-8 years, and he's a position coach, and you kind of see the rise and the progression of guys.
I remember Mike Vrabel getting drafted.
Yeah, Vrabel's a great.
Now he's standing here. It's amazing.
Yeah, you can sort of see. I think the whole cycle of the NFL is really on display this week, and it's just as someone who covers the game and works in it, and is just a fan of it. It's enjoyable to see the whole process from start to finish.
Luke and I were talking. Look, we did not literally know what Matt Patricia sounded like.
Right.
Like I'd never heard his
voice. Does not match up with how he looks.
Yeah,
he was much more soft-spoken.
You
not that he is soft-spoken, but more soft-spoken than I thought. I thought he'd be much more that grizzly voice to go with that beard.
And I'm not going to throw Zrebeck or Luke or myself under the bus, but I just did, okay? We literally, didn't know what Duke Tobin looked like.
Yeah, right?
You know what I mean? Like Kevin Colbert, I've seen him at these events for 10 years and obviously have this great relationship with Mike Tomlin. I've never chatted with Kevin Colbert in my life. I don't know if I sat next to him on a plane that I would absolutely, if he wasn't wearing a Steeler hat, no. And Ozzy's so familiar to people. John Elway, there's some famous GMs and there's some Bill Polian types that did it for a long time. And then there's a Chris Ballard that I didn't even really know what he looked like. But you sit here and you listen to them talk for a little while and you see how they got their gig. And you see how an Eric DeCosta fits into this club sort of in that way of being behind the scenes. But nobody here knows what Eric looks like for the most part.
Yeah.
In the same way we wouldn't know who the people behind the scenes are. But hearing them, I was Kevin Colbert has a Pittsburgh accent. I did not know that. Even for me, all these years that you say, hey, you've been doing this all this time, it's been a very educational day to just sit and listen to these people in a way that I wouldn't sit at home at NFL Network and just sit there and watch a John Gruden press conference. I just wouldn't, honestly.
Yeah.
But today, it's being 10 feet away. You see the look in people's eyes. This has been a better format for that than the old Indianapolis Dome thing they did.
Right. Well, it's just, to me, I think it is an educational piece of this whole process. I mean, when you have a chance to kind of see these prospects, I'm actually going through and looking. It's fun. I'm going back through and looking at what the Ravens rookies from last year said at the Combine at this event last year. And it was kind of interesting. Like, I was looking at what Chris Wormley said, and he was asked about the possibility of being coached by another Harbaugh because he played at Michigan, so he was, of course, coached by Jim Harbaugh. And he was asked here at the Combine last year about the possibility of playing for another Harbaugh at the NFL level. And then it ends up happening. Was that question
asked by Garrett Downey?
I don't remember. It would have been a great one. Whoever asked it, it was a fantastic question.
It wasn't Luke Rye. We weren't here.
But that is always kind of interesting to see. And Marlon Humphrey was talking about whether he's the best corner in the draft. Just like it's interesting to see what guys say. And I think that for me, it's always been beneficial. You get a real appreciation for, I think, players around the league, and it's an educational thing for you. Know these guys from the time they walk onto the NFL scene, and then when they're in the NFL this year, next year, down the road, you have a really kind of good foundation for that.
What other positions are you looking for with the Ravens? I mean, we've talked about wide receiver going into the draft. What are some other position groups that you're interested in monitoring over the next few days and might be maybe not a need, but maybe an area where the Ravens could really benefit to upgrade? You're on either side of the ball, because let's not completely ignore the defense.
You can't swing the pendulum the complete other direction there. I think I am interested in a couple ones. I'm interested in tight end because I think that this team could really benefit from having, Benjamin Watson was really good for what he was last year, but he's a guy who's 37 years old, coming off a torn Achilles, and I think that the Ravens got good production out of him last year, but it would be great to have another Dennis Pitta in his prime kind of a player. So I think tight end is definitely one. We spent so much time talking about wide receiver. Well, if you get a dynamic tight end, that can do a lot of the same things.
Be a little more interchangeable.
Yeah. So, and I'm not. They have a lot of blocking tight ends, but they need a big guy that can make contested catches over the middle of the field. Red zone threat. That would be something that I will definitely be keeping an eye on this year. Another one is inside linebacker. I actually. It's interesting. I think that the Ravens will go offensive heavy this year, but I'm going to be curious at number 16 if Roquan Smith from Georgia is there. He was the heart and soul of that team. He's a sideline-to-sideline player, and if you put him next to C.J. Mosley, I think you might have the best linebacker tandem in the NFL.
I'd pull a dollar out right now and say he won't be there at 16. Right now. We would have done that 2 years ago, right? We would have looked at – we would have said, well, John Ross will be there last year, or whatever. Yeah. That's how it changes. But right now, we talked about Joey Bosa earlier today about how his stock somehow fell over nothing.
But then he still was picked in the top four, third overall.
Yeah. I mean, so it's hard to say. I never thought, last year people were talking about the possibility of Reuben Foster being a top 5, top 10 pick, and then he had his issues here at the Combine, actually, and then he ended up going all the way at the end of the first round. So
I remember the Miles Jack year, right?
Yeah,
we all remember that.
Oh, yeah, he could be a top 5 pick, and he ends up going to the second round. So, right now I hesitate to put too much emphasis on, where everybody is saying these players are.
You got a mock draft yet?
I do not have a mock draft yet. That's
I mock drafts this time of year.
We're going to wait on that. I will do a 7-round mock draft when the time comes, which, for the record, I always like to point this out. Mick and I do a 7-round mock draft. And I've hit on some guys in the first round and later on. The one year I hit Elam and Brown, both 1 and 2 on the head. So that was kind of my pride and joy.
Inside information.
Didn't work out so well.
You know what happened? You have a key to the building, and you snuck down to the war room, and you took some, Get Smart pictures. And
we actually find out he's the brains behind the operation.
Yeah, exactly, right? The funny thing is, obviously I have no idea who they're going to pick based on what in reality. And so we'll make our predictions, and then some of the scouts will come down and bust our chops over, either before and after the draft. Like, man, you guys are idiots. You missed on all of them. And so it's always kind of fun. It's a fun exercise.
Do you know that story that because I've told it to a couple different people recently in the old days when Phil and Brian were sort of running the show, that I would on Friday go out to the complex and I would and Mark Acevedo and I were talking because we flew together. Mm-hmm. Mark's an old line scout, and a lot of these guys, Douglas, T.J. McCrate, all these guys with the Eagles, Andy Weidel, they were a part of it many moons ago. But on Friday, I would walk down the hallway, never in the war room, never near Ozzy, but Eric, Joe, George. We go back through all the scouts. They would have an envelope and a sheet of paper, Ravens letterhead, and they would write down the name of one player they thought the Ravens would have on Monday.
Yeah.
So all you had to do was get one player, one shot to say this on Monday when I open the envelope, we're going to have a player in there. And I did this for 7 or 8 years. It was Phil's idea, Phil Savage's idea, because we used to always do the Monday crab show at the barn. And it was fascinating to see how especially when you're picking 16 or 20, and in that era, the Ravens were always picking in the 20s, right? Yeah. After the Super Bowl in 2001, they never really had a lottery pick other than Suggs. That one they had the Jamal Lewis thing too, but right around that era. But before then, but when you're picking, there were years where names like Travis LeBoy would show up on 6 guys' page. And they traded back to take Upshaw or take somebody else.
Yeah.
But there was one year where Dan Cody and the other player, who was the other player in that draft?
Mark Clayton.
That literally half the guys in the room had 3 or 4 had Mark Clayton, 3 or 4 had Cody, and we got them both. Which was really, like on Monday, it was like, wow, and some years it's way off. I don't know last year, had I walked down that hallway and gotten 10 guys in the know to fill out, how many would have written Marlon Humphrey down.
Right.
Well, that would have been fascinating.
Well, Eric likes to joke about it, whether he could kind of do his own mock draft and predict.
Friday night when he goes to bed and says to Lacey, "This is the guy we're taking tomorrow," he's wrong more than half the time.
Right, and that's and he's one of the guys in the room making the decision, and it's like if he doesn't know,
it just comes to you that way.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
No one in the world had Suggs on that sheet of paper because they never thought he'd get there.
Right.
Remember that whole snafu with the Vikings and getting the pick in and the Jaguars and all that.
What you can't control in the draft, obviously, is what everybody else does. And so you can have your plans, and you can have, we want to target this guy, and no one else is going to. And you can see it sometimes, at the end of draft weekend, they'll come down from the draft room, and they'll just be like, it felt like everybody was picking off of our board. They've said that at times. It felt like everyone had the same board as us, and the guys that we wanted went right before us. Or other years they come down and they say, wow, we got the guys. We were getting guys in the 3rd round who we thought were going to go in the 1st round that were never going to be there.
I remember the year they took Ray Rice, that Belichick had the next pick and wanted him. And they stole him.
Right. And
we bragged about that for a while, and then not so much lately.
And I'm sure that there's guys from other teams who have taken guys right in front of the Ravens and said, oh, that was somebody that
was our guy.
Yeah, that was in. That happens. That there's guys that come off the board, a pick or 2 before, and there's probably a lot of, hand wringing in the draft room. And
that goes back to Kyle Brady, if you want to look that up, and how we went up with Ray Lewis, literally.
Yeah.
That's how we got the Ray Lewis pick.
Well, Ed Reed, too, was somebody that it wasn't,
he was the last guy.
He was, okay, this is the guy on the board, and this is who you take. And sometimes it works out best that way.
It really does. And it's funny you mentioned you have no control over other teams, and hearing some of these coaches and executives talk, we always think of trading up and trading back. And so many people have talked about
Ozzie loves him some phone now.
Yeah. Well, but it just comes down to it. Let's use Calvin Ridley as a perfect example. If he's there at 13, are the Ravens tempted to try to move up? Is there someone tempted to play ball with them? Two sides have to be there to make a trade. And on the flip side, many people in the Ravens have typically done more of this over the years, but trading back, and maybe you try to trade back to the end of the 1st round, and maybe you like some of those other receivers at the end of the 1st round, but you have to have someone to partner up there.
We goofed around with Flacco until Bisciotti went nuts and said, cut it out, pick him.
Sure.
Let's go trade up and pick him,
right.
Because we moved back.
Right, moved back, then, kind of just hanging out there.
Come on, Eric and I, they're all pick whores. They want as many picks as they can get. There's as many chances they can get to get a player. We are stunned about the 3rd round thing because we talked about that, the compensatory pick, in sort of the active sense for the longest time, and now that's not there. That's just proof. That's a Friday pick we don't have that we thought we were going to have.
Yeah, that's a not. That hurts, obviously. But I think that in terms of trading up or trading back, it's an interesting idea. I don't know if Calvin Ridley. I don't know if he would be a guy that's worth it.
Right. I use him as an example. Right.
But I do think.
But if he's your pride and joy and the only guy,
then I think my indication would be that you might be more willing to trade up and get a guy like that this year. That's the way I feel. Based on the way that you're trying to really add impact players to the offense, I would probably be more willing to do that in a year like this. It depends on what happens in free agency. If the Ravens, let's just say they go into the draft and Mike Wallace is gone and they aren't able to get a guy like Jarvis Landry, who everyone's talking about right now, and you're like, all right, we really need this draft to be a guy that get a guy that comes in and plays immediately, potentially starts immediately, then you would probably be more willing and kind of forced almost to go that route.
Yeah.
Love our conversations with Garrett Downing. It's all brought to you by our friends at Pizza John's. You're not a local guy. Have you ever – now, look, there's a big corporate pizza battle going on in the NFL. Right. I go local, man. That's Pizza John's right there. Everybody – see, you don't know, right? You've never been to Pizza John's?
I've not been to Pizza John's.
Go ahead, Luke. Go ahead.
You need to go.
Luke drives from Pennsylvania. It's in Essex. I can read the whole ad
for you.
It's a
50-minute drive from my house, and I will at least a couple times a year make that
Here's
drive.
what you need to know. It was my mom's favorite pizza, and she left us in August. My wife's favorite pizza. I've been eating there since 1970. I want to say 3. So that's how long I've been getting pizza at Pizza John's. 113 Back River Neck Road. They've been doing it 50 years, same as me. And here's the challenge for you. Go over Get you get the meat sauce for Luke.
Meat sauce and pepperoni.
If you're not a meat sauce, I'm not a meat sauce guy. I like it. I like a green pepper, mushroom, sausage, and pepperoni. The pepperoni special.
The pepperoni, the little grease cups.
Yeah, they we don't call them that on the radio, but they're just tasty little boogers. That's all I'm going to say. But we love Pizza John's. Get on over to Essex and give them some love. Also, our friends at Al's Seafood right down the street. If you're down there, crabs, crab cakes, shrimp to go. My mom loved the shrimp with the onions and the beer and all that stuff. The oldest crab house in Baltimore in Essex. You can find us there. You can also find us out in the bay at Toyota.com. Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world and your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from everywhere. You're out at Ravens.com. You can follow Garrett Downing on Twitter as well. And, the next 8 weeks, it's just speculation and more speculation.
Yeah, it's what it is. That's just the nature of the business, but it's kind of fun. And we'll get maybe, again, I'm curious to see what sort of hints at that offseason blueprint we get when Ozzie Newsome talks on Friday. I think that's going to be something that is sort of must-see TV.
If Eric DeCoste ever tells you that he's drafting Martae Jenkins, he's lying to you. So bring that up with him. We're here on Radio Row. We are in Indianapolis, Indiana. Luke and I riding shotgun. You can find him, Luke, at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke on Twitter. Any breaking news will happen first on the WNST text service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday and every Thursday. One year we're going to drag him out to Indianapolis. He's waiting for the draft to go to L.A. He'll be here from 3 until 5. It is the SSV on WNST. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. We are streaming live on our Facebook Live from here in Indianapolis, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.